4 days before James Van Der Beek took his final breath, the room wasn't filled with silence. It was filled with laughter, with whispered prayers, with old stories retold one last time, friends holding his hands, his wife is by his side, and a man who knew the clock was ticking but refused to let fear have the final word. Most people never get a goodbye like that. When news broke that James had passed away at 48 after a private battle with colorectal cancer, the headlines felt sudden. But behind the scenes, something deeply intimate had been unfolding. Those closest to him weren't just visiting, they were living every second with him. No phones, no distractions, just presence. And what they've shared since has completely changed how fans see his final chapter. One friend said he handled death like a king. Another revealed they were there for the last 4 or 5 days, every single day, holding his hand, singing to him, even telling jokes while the world outside had no idea how serious things had become. And then there was the sunset. A wheelchair facing the horizon, a sky shifting colors, a shooting star streaking across the darkness at the exact moment promises were made. Some say it felt like a sign, others say it was just a coincidence. But everyone who was there agrees on one thing. Those last moments were anything but ordinary. What really happened inside that room? Why did so many of his closest friends rush to be there? And what did James say in his final days that left grown men openly admitting they're broken? Because the public saw the announcement, but the real story started long before that. The truth is, this didn't start in 2024. It started quietly in August 2023. When James Van Der Beek received the diagnosis that would change everything: colorectal cancer, a word heavy enough to stop anyone in their tracks. But instead of going public, instead of making headlines, he made a different choice. He kept it close. For nearly a year, fans had no idea what he was carrying. No dramatic announcement, no press tour confessions, just a man fighting something brutal behind the scenes, while still showing up as a husband, a father of 6, and a friend. Reports say he wanted to protect his children first, shield them from the noise, from the speculation, from the internet turning his pain into content. And that tells you everything about where his priorities were. When he finally revealed the diagnosis in 2024, the tone wasn't desperate, it wasn't angry, it was steady, measured, even hopeful. He spoke about treatment, about faith, about staying strong, and for a while it looked like that strength was working. Those closest to him later described that period as a fragile high. There were days when it seemed like he had it beat, moments when test results brought relief. Friends say the energy shifted back toward optimism. Plans were discussed, future projects teased. The idea that this would just become another chapter he overcame started to feel real. But cancer doesn't care about optimism. Behind the hopeful updates, there were hospital visits that didn't go as planned, treatments that drained him more than expected, and long nights where the reality of what he was facing became impossible to ignore. Still, he rarely let that side show publicly, because the fight wasn't just medical, it was emotional, it was spiritual. It was about staying strong in front of 6 young faces who saw him as invincible, and according to those closest to him, he carried that responsibility heavily, sometimes choosing silence over sympathy. For months, he battled quietly. But what his friends would later reveal is that the hardest part wasn't the diagnosis itself. It was what happened when hope started slipping through their fingers. Those inside his circle began rearranging their lives. Flights were booked quietly, calendars cleared. Not for publicity, not for social media, but because something in the air felt urgent. This wasn't about beating it anymore. It was about time. Friends have hinted that James understood the shift before anyone else said it out loud. There's something about a long fight that sharpens your awareness. He had already endured months of physical strain. He knew his body, and when the tone changed, he didn't panic. He prepared. And that's when the atmosphere around him transformed. The desperation faded. In its place came something steadier. Conversations became deeper, more intentional. Words mattered more. Silence mattered more. The fight hadn't disappeared, but it evolved. And as the reality settled in, his inner circle began gathering, not because it was the end yet, but because they didn't want to miss a single second of whatever came next. Then came the final 4 days. Not chaotic, not filled with panic, but heavy with meaning. McCad Brooks later revealed he was there every single day during that stretch. Not for a quick visit, not for a photo. He stayed. He held James's hand. He prayed with him. He cracked jokes when the room felt too quiet. He even sang to him. And according to Brooks, what he witnessed wasn't fear, it was strength. He said James handled death like a king. Think about that for a second. Most people unravel when facing the inevitable: anger, regret, desperation. But those present described something different: a calm acceptance, a man more focused on comforting the people around him than on his own discomfort. There were moments of pain, of course. No one pretended this was easy. But the energy in the room, as friends described it, wasn't dark. It was intentional. Alfonso Ribeiro shared that he was lucky enough to say goodbye in person. That word, lucky, says everything, because not everyone gets that chance. He admitted he's so broken right now, but also grateful. Grateful he could look his friend in the eyes one last time. Grateful he could speak the words that too often go unsaid. And it wasn't just quiet bedside whispers. There was what some called energy work. There were hands joined in prayer. Stories from decades of friendship were surfacing. Laughter breaking through tears. Friends telling him exactly what he meant to them. No ego, no holding back. One of the most striking details shared later was how present everyone felt. No scrolling, no distractions, just breath, heartbeat, and time ticking in the background. When you know time is sacred, you don't waste it. And in those final days, nothing was wasted. Those who were there say something shifted in that room. It wasn't about fighting anymore. It was about honoring, about making sure he felt surrounded, about ensuring that if this were the final chapter, it would be written with dignity. But even in those intimate moments, something happened that no one expected, and it unfolded under a fading sky. One evening, as the light began to soften and the sky turned that deep gold just before dusk, they wheeled him outside. Not for a dramatic moment, not for a final photo op, just to feel the air. Stacy Keebler later shared a photo from that night. James sitting in a wheelchair, facing the horizon, watching the sun slowly disappear. It wasn't staged, it wasn't polished, it was raw. A man who once stood under Hollywood spotlights is now sitting quietly under a changing sky. And that's when something shifted. Keebler described those final sunsets as sacred. No rushing, no checking the time, just sitting, listening, holding hands. She wrote that when you truly understand time is limited, you stop wasting it. You don't scroll, you don't plan tomorrow, you stay right where you are. That night, they talked about everything. About how upside down the world feels sometimes, about faith, about promises, about his kids, about the kind of legacy that doesn't show up in headlines. There were no grand speeches, just an honest conversation between people who knew the clock was loud now. And then, as the sun slipped away, a shooting star crossed the sky. Now, skeptics will say it was a coincidence, and maybe it was, but those who were there say the timing felt almost unreal, like punctuation at the end of a sentence no one wanted to finish. Keebler later hinted that it felt like a reminder that none of this was random. In that moment, the fear that had hovered for months seemed quieter. What replaced it wasn't denial, it was a surrender. Not in a defeated way, but in a trusting way. Friends have suggested that James spoke about trusting God's plan, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. And whether you're spiritual or not, the symbolism of that night is hard to ignore. A fading sun, a streak of light across the darkness, promises made in whispers. By the time they wheeled him back inside, everyone understood something without saying it out loud. The goodbye was getting closer. But while the world still hadn't fully grasped what was happening, his family already knew what these moments meant. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, they made a quiet decision. Take him outside. No grand announcements, no dramatic buildup, just a wheelchair, a fading sky, and the kind of silence that only comes when everyone knows the moment matters. Stacy Keebler later shared that evening in a post that felt almost sacred. James sat facing the sunset, watching the sky shift from gold to pink to deep blue. There was no rush, no phones out, no distractions, just presence. The kind people promise themselves they'll practice one day, but rarely do. She described those minutes as some of the most powerful of her life. They didn't talk about fear, they talked about perspective, about how strange and upside down the world can feel, about faith, about purpose, about his children, about promises that would outlive him. And according to what she shared, James wasn't spiraling. He was steady, reflective, even comforting the people around him. Then something happened that no one in that circle will ever forget. As the last edge of the sun disappeared, a shooting star cut across the sky. Now, to some, that's a coincidence, pure timing. But to the people standing there, holding his hand, knowing time was fragile, it felt symbolic. Keebler hinted that it felt like a reminder that none of this was random, that maybe there was something bigger unfolding. In that exact window between daylight and darkness, the mood shifted. The fight that had defined the past year felt quieter, not because it didn't matter anymore, but because the energy in the room had changed. It wasn't about battling, it was about honoring, about absorbing every second. Friends later said those sunsets taught them more about presence than any book ever could. When time is sacred, you don't waste a single breath. You sit, you listen, you hold hands, you let the sky change you. And by the time they wheeled him back inside, everyone understood something without needing to say it out loud. The goodbye was no longer theoretical. It was close. And inside that house, his family was preparing for a moment they knew would echo forever. Through all of it, the treatments, the setbacks, the late-night hospital drives, one thing never shifted. His family came first. James wasn't just an actor fighting a disease. He was a husband, a father to 6 kids who still saw him as their hero. And according to those closest to him, that role mattered more than any red carpet ever did. Kimberly Vanderbeek later shared that he met his final days with courage, faith, and grace. That wasn't PR language. That was someone who had watched him up close. Someone who saw the hard nights, the exhaustion, the physical toll, and still witnessed him choosing softness over bitterness. Reports suggest he tried to shield the children from the harshest realities for as long as he could, not by lying, but by carrying the emotional weight himself. He didn't want their memories clouded by hospital rooms and whispered worry. He wanted them filled with normalcy, with laughter, with dad still being dad. And that's a heavy burden to carry while fighting something relentless. In those final days, the atmosphere inside the house wasn't frantic, it was intentional. Kimberly stood beside him, steady. Friends who visited made it clear the focus wasn't on fame or career or unfinished projects. It was love, on creating an environment where the kids felt safe, even if the adults knew the truth. There's something powerful about a man choosing how his family will remember him, not as someone defeated, not as someone angry at the world, but as someone who trusted, who leaned into faith when answers ran out, who held hands instead of pushing people away. Those close to the family have hinted that his biggest concern wasn't himself, it was how they would cope afterwards. He wanted them surrounded, supported, protected from the chaos that inevitably follows public loss. And when the news finally broke, the world reacted with shock. But inside that home, they had already walked through the hardest part together. Still, what his friends began revealing next showed that his impact stretched far beyond his own household. To the world, he was Dawson, the teen heartthrob, the face on magazine covers, the guy who defined a generation of TV drama. But that wasn't the man his friends were grieving. As tributes poured in, a different version of James started to emerge, one fans rarely saw. Not the actor, not the public figure, the mentor, the spiritual anchor, the guy who showed up when no cameras were rolling. Alfonso Ribeiro didn't just call him a friend, he called him a brother, a life guide. That's not casual wording, that's the kind of language you use for someone who helps shape your decisions, your mindset, your family life. Ribeiro even said he would always consider being a godfather to one of James' children, one of the most important roles of his own life. That tells you this wasn't a surface-level Hollywood friendship. Designer Erin Featherston shared photos from his final days, one of her holding his hand at his bedside. Not glamorous, not curated, just raw loyalty. She wrote about having a seat at your table, about dancing in his honor because he always believed joy mattered, even in heavy seasons. Joy. That word keeps coming up. Friends described him as someone who insisted on light, even when things were dark. Someone who reminded them to stay present, to stay grounded, to choose gratitude. Beckett Brooks talked about praying with him, singing to him, telling jokes, not because the situation wasn't serious, but because James didn't want the room swallowed by despair. He wasn't pretending everything was fine. He was choosing how he wanted his final chapter to feel. And maybe that's the part fans didn't expect. Behind the scripted drama and Hollywood headlines was a man deeply focused on faith, family, and emotional growth. Someone who had clearly evolved far beyond the roles that made him famous. Even the language his friends used, guardian angel, changed my life, honor of my life, reveals something bigger. This wasn't nostalgia talking, it was reverence. When someone passes and the first wave of tributes all point to how they made others better, that's not a coincidence, that's character. And now, with the public finally seeing this deeply personal side of him, one question lingers in Hollywood circles and among fans alike. Did we ever really know him at all? In the end, it wasn't the red carpets people talked about. It wasn't ratings or headlines or the teen idol years that made him famous. It was the way he faced the unthinkable. A man diagnosed in 2023, quietly fighting for months, riding the highs when it looked like he might win, enduring the crushing lows when it came back harder, and then when the battle shifted from cure to time, choosing presence over panic. That's the legacy emerging now, not just an actor from a beloved show, but a husband who protected his family's peace, a father who carried the emotional weight so his kids wouldn't have to, a friend who somehow comforted others while facing his own final chapter. The intimate photo shared after his passing changed the narrative. The wheelchair facing the sunset, the hand bedside holding, the confessions from grown men admitting they're broken. These weren't publicity moments. They were raw snapshots of love and loyalty. And maybe that's why this story feels different. Because in a world that moves fast and scrolls past grief in seconds, his final days force everyone close to him to slow down, to sit still, to watch the sky change, to say the things people usually wait too long to say. There's something unsettling about losing someone at 48. It makes you confront your own timeline, your own unfinished conversations, your own distractions. And maybe that's why the Sunset story resonates so deeply. Not because of the shooting star itself, but because everyone in that moment was fully there. No filters, no future planning, just now. His friends have said heaven gained something extraordinary. Whether you see that spiritually or symbolically, one thing is clear: the impact he left behind isn't fading anytime soon. Sometimes a person's final chapter reveals more about them than decades of public success ever could. And if there's one lesson echoing through every tribute, every photo, every tearful goodbye, it's this: time is sacred. The question is, what are we doing with ours?